The final turn onto the estate's private road was less a revelation and more a descent. The tarmac, cracked and choked with moss, gave way to a gravel track that groaned beneath the tires of my battered sedan. Rain, a fine mist at first, began to beat on the windshield, blurring the already indistinct shapes of ancient, twisted trees. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a sigh whispered through decaying leaves. I'd inherited it, along with a hefty stack of legal documents and the lingering questions surrounding my great-aunt Elara's abrupt departure from this world. Estranged for decades, Elara had been a name invoked with hushed tones, a reclusive botanist whose life, even to her closest relatives, remained largely a mystery. After everything, the idea of a fresh start, a complete severance from the familiar, had a desperate appeal. This isolated corner of the Pacific Northwest, with its perpetual mist and towering evergreens, seemed to promise exactly that. An escape. The manor materialized slowly through the graying afternoon light, a hulking silhouette against a bruised sky. It was larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling Victorian edifice of dark stone and intricate, weather-beaten woodwork. Turrets rose like skeletal fingers, and gables sagged under the weight of years. It wasn't just old, it felt ancient, a place that had watched seasons turn into centuries. A wave of something akin to awe, tinged with a prickle of unease, washed over me. This was it. My new beginning. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof and the distant, mournful cry of some unseen bird. The air, even through the closed windows, smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and something else, a faint, sweet, almost cloying odor that I couldn't quite place. Like overripe fruit left too long in a forgotten pantry. Stepping out, the gravel crunched under my boots. The house loomed, its windows like vacant eyes reflecting the dull sky. I clutched the heavy iron key, its cold metal biting into my palm, and walked towards the massive front door. A rusted knocker, shaped like a grimacing gargoyle, hung askew. I didn't bother with it. The lock groaned in protest as I turned the key, a sound like an old man clearing his throat. The air was thick, heavy with the scent I'd noticed outside, now more potent, mingled with the musty odor of decay and something indefinably organic. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but it was present, a living breath in the stagnant air. My footsteps echoed on the mosaic tile of the grand foyer, the sound swallowed by the vastness of the space. To my right, a large drawing room, its furniture draped in ghostly white sheets. Everything was exactly as Elara had left it, frozen in time. I ran a hand along the dusty surface of a nearby console table. The wood felt strangely cool, almost damp. He had been a botanist, a collector of the peculiar. I expected dried flowers, pressed leaves. What I found, tucked into a corner of the main hall, was a tall, narrow display case. Inside, not delicate blossoms, but what looked like a collection of hardened, petrified fungi, some resembling twisted, blackened coral, others like clusters of iridescent, sickly green pods. They weren't beautiful, they were unsettling, their forms alien and grotesque. The cloying scent, I realized, was strongest near the case. I needed to see the grounds, to get a sense of the scale of this place. The rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the roof. I found a heavy, moth-eaten coat hanging by a side door, its pockets bulging with dried leaves and what felt like small, smooth stones. Pulling it on, I pushed open the door and stepped out into the raw, damp air. The gardens, or what remained of them, sprawled outward, a tangled wilderness of overgrown shrubs and trees that seemed to claw at the sky. Elara's passion for botany had clearly manifested in a chaotic, untamed beauty. But even here, among the familiar shapes of rhododendrons and ferns, I saw hints of the unusual. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that vibrated through the sodden earth. I pulled the heavy coat tighter, my determination to survey the property undimmed. It looked like something from a forgotten age, an outpost against an unseen enemy. The storm was gathering strength, the sky overhead a bruised purple, and the wind was a living thing, pushing against me as I moved, boots sinking slightly into the marshy ground. I pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable curiosity, a need to touch the edges of this new, strange world. The tower offered a momentary respite from the deluge, its entrance a low, arched opening. Rain lashed against the exterior, the wind screaming through unseen cracks, making the whole structure groan and tremble around me. The cloying scent, faint but undeniable, seemed to emanate from the very walls. The light was fading rapidly, the storm swallowing the last vestiges of day. Elara hadn't just tended a garden. She tended something else, and I was beginning to suspect that something was still here, waiting. The rain, a fine mist at first, began to beat on the windshield, blurring the already indistinguishable stretch of unkempt forest flanking the gravel track. The sedan's wipers fought a losing battle, smearing the view into an impressionistic canvas of gray and green. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. This was it. No turning back, not after everything. I told myself this was a fresh start, a clean slate, a place to finally breathe. Through the watery distortion, the house finally materialized, less a welcoming beacon and more a looming sentinel. Blackwood Manor. It was larger than the photos suggested, a sprawling, Gothic silhouette against the bruised sky. The air, even inside the car, felt thick, tasting of damp earth and something else, a faint, almost metallic tang, like old copper. I pulled the sedan to a halt on the overgrown drive. From this vantage point, I could just make out a structure through a break in the dense foliage, a crumbling stone cylinder silhouetted against the stormy horizon, a decrepit guard tower in a storm. The house loomed, silent and immense. No friendly porch light, no sign of life beyond the insistent drip and gurgle of rainwater. I wrestled my duffel bag and a box of essentials from the trunk, the gravel crunching under my boots with each hesitant step towards the front door. My great-aunt Elara certainly had a taste for the dramatic. A faint, earthy scent, like compost mixed with dust and something vaguely floral, hung in the gloom. Each movement I made, each creak of the floorboards, echoed with unnatural clarity. The silence wasn't empty, it felt full, somehow. I spent the first hour simply trying to establish a foothold. I dragged my bag up to what I assumed was a master bedroom, a vast space with a four-poster bed draped in cobwebs. The windows here overlooked a tangled expanse of what must have been the formal gardens. My immediate goal was simple: unpack, find a working outlet, and maybe, just maybe, make some coffee. As I moved through the empty rooms, a new sound began to surface, almost imperceptible at first. I paused, tilting my head, listening. Just the house settling, I told myself, an old structure finding its equilibrium after years of neglect. But it felt different. More rhythmic. The fading daylight, filtered through the grimy panes, cast long, wavering forms across the polished wood floors. A coat rack in the hall seemed to stretch and contort, its silhouette momentarily resembling a hunched figure. I blinked, and it was just a coat rack again. My nerves were simply frayed, I reasoned, a natural reaction to the isolation and the sheer scale of the place. After finding a functional kitchen, surprisingly well preserved beneath a layer of dust, and managing to brew a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, I decided to explore. Elara's reputation as a botanist, coupled with the property description, hinted at extensive gardens. I suspected a conservatory, a place where he would have kept her more exotic specimens. Following a hunch and a faint, sweet and sour perfume that grew stronger with each step, I found it. Tucked away at the rear of the manor, accessible through a narrow, almost hidden door off a disused drawing room, was a vast, glass-paned structure. The conservatory. Stepping inside felt like entering another world. My flashlight beam cut through the perpetual twilight, illuminating a riot of plant life. It wasn't merely overgrown, it was wild. Vines as thick as my arm snaked across the glass ceiling, dripping tendrils down towards the floor. Enormous, unfamiliar leaves, some veined with iridescent patterns, unfurled from unseen stalks. Flowers I'd never encountered bloomed in impossible shades of purple and black, their petals seeming to pulse faintly in the low light. They were clearer, a chorus of soft, sibilant sounds that seemed to rise from the very soil, from the fronds of the plants, from the humid air itself. It wasn't language, not exactly, but a cacophony of soft, insistent sounds, like 1,000 hushed breaths. I took a step deeper, drawn by a morbid curiosity. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. But there was no breeze, no open window. The air was utterly still, heavy and warm. A slow, wet slurp, like something drawing moisture from the earth. Nothing moved. Blackwood Manor wasn't just old. It was alive. And it was listening. The gravel track had long since surrendered to encroaching moss and stubborn weeds, making the car lurch and groan with every hidden rut. I could feel the tires slip and catch, the spray from the puddles kicking up against the undercarriage with a metallic hiss. Through a momentary thinning of the rain, a structure materialized to my left, hulking and skeletal against the bruised sky. The top half was missing, ripped away by some forgotten gale, leaving jagged splinters like broken teeth. Rust-colored streaks bled down its support beams, mixing with the relentless rain, creating a weeping, metallic sorrow. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, a cold premonition that had nothing to do with the dampness seeping into the car. This place didn't just feel isolated, it felt forgotten, left to decay with a quiet, lingering malice. Finally, the track opened into a vast, overgrown circle, where Blackwood Manor stood. The front door, when I finally wrestled it open, groaned in protest, a sound that echoed through the cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light that penetrated the stained glass transom. The air inside was still, heavy, and tasted of disuse and something vaguely vegetal, an earthy sweetness that felt out of place in such a grand, decaying space. I wandered through the silent halls, my footsteps muffled by thick, threadbare rugs. The furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the gloom. I hadn't known Elara well, not really, but her presence was palpable, a lingering scent of dried leaves and something sharp, like ammonia. Then I felt it, a subtle, almost imperceptible tug, like a string unwinding from the center of my chest. It wasn't a sound, or a smell, or even a visual cue. It was an internal compass swinging wildly, pointing me towards the back of the house, towards a grand set of double doors I hadn't noticed before. I pushed them open. The scent was overwhelming now, a rich, cloying perfume of damp soil, exotic blooms, and something undeniably animalistic, musky and a little unsettling. This was the conservatory. It was a cathedral of glass and green, a sprawling jungle contained beneath a vaulted ceiling that wept condensation. Sunlight, even muted by the storm, filtered through the grimy panes, casting an emerald glow on the riotous growth within. The plants here were unlike anything I had ever seen. They weren't just overgrown, they were alien. Vines, thick as my arm, snaked across the ceiling and down the walls, their leaves a spectrum of deep purples, iridescent blues, and sickly yellows. Some bore fleshy, bell-shaped flowers that pulsed with a faint, internal light, while others had tendrils tipped with what looked like miniature, grasping claws. There were plants that resembled enormous, segmented insects, their bodies covered in fine, bristly hairs, and others that unfurled broad, leathery leaves patterned with intricate, almost geometric designs. A path, barely discernible, wound its way through the dense foliage, and I followed it, compelled by that strange, insistent pull. The plants brushed against me, their surfaces cool and slick, some surprisingly firm, others yielding with a spongy give. It felt less like a garden and more like an organism, a living, breathing entity that had swallowed the room whole. It was covered in a layer of green dust, but on its surface lay a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle and yellowed. Elara's journals. I picked up the top one, the leather cool and dry beneath my fingers. Her elegant, spidery script filled the pages, initially detailing observations of growth rates and soil compositions. But as I flipped further, the entries grew erratic, the handwriting more frenzied. The growth responds. It understands. Its tendrils seek connection. My breath hitched. I turned another page. The root strengthens. A network. It reaches. I looked around, my eyes scanning the bizarre flora that surrounded me. The low hum seemed to intensify, a subtle vibration in the very air. They hunger. The offering must be pure. To feed the root. To nourish the growth. My gaze fell on a particularly large plant near the desk, its central stalk a thick, gnarled column from which sprouted broad, flat leaves that seemed to pulse faintly. And I had walked right into it. That plant near the desk, its central stalk a thick, gnarled column, kept drawing my eye. It was the veins, a deep, unsettling crimson, that truly held my attention. I reached out, my fingers hovering an inch from one of the leaves. There was a warmth radiating from it, subtle but distinct, like a low-grade fever. A shiver traced its way down my spine, entirely unrelated to the chill of the old house. I pulled my hand back, a prickle of unease blooming in my chest. This wasn't just a strange plant, it felt aware. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the isolation playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't merely the house's ancient gaze, it felt specific, focused, as if something in the room was studying me, assessing me. I spun around, scanning the dusty shelves, the heavy drapes, the closed door. Nothing. As I passed the grand staircase, I heard a faint thump from upstairs. I froze, listening. Then, a distinct creak from the landing. It wasn't the settling of old timbers, it sounded like weight. No answer. I forced myself to walk up the first few steps, peering into the gloom of the upper hall. I saw nothing. Turning to descend, my foot caught on something. I stumbled, grabbing the banister to steady myself. Looking down, I saw a small, antique silver letter opener lying on the step. I was certain it hadn't been there. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Had it rolled off a table? Unlikely, it was too far from any furniture. Had I kicked it earlier without noticing? The air grew heavy, pressing in on me. I walked into the drawing room, drawn by the large, ornate mirror above the fireplace. My reflection stared back, pale and drawn, eyes wide with a fear I didn't want to admit. But as I watched, the edges of my reflection seemed to waver, to stretch. The distortion vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me staring at my perfectly normal, terrified face. This wasn't just the house settling. This was deliberate. It was playing a game, and I was losing. I needed to call someone. Anyone. The lawyer, a colleague, even a long-lost friend. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out, thumbing the screen to life. No service. I sighed, frustration warring with rising panic. This part of the Pacific Northwest was notorious for spotty reception. I tried again, walking to the large bay window that overlooked the overgrown grounds. Still nothing. The signal bars remained stubbornly empty. Come on, I muttered, shaking the device like it might magically conjure a connection. It was useless. I remembered Elara had an old landline phone in the study, a rotary model. Maybe that would work. I found the phone, its plastic yellowed with age, sitting on a small side table. The cord snaked into the wall. I picked up the receiver. Not even a dial tone. I pressed it to my ear, listening intently, hoping for some faint static, anything. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing. The line was completely dead. Completely. No way in, no way out, not by phone at least. I looked out the window again, beyond the immediate gardens, towards the distant, rugged coastline. The weather had taken a turn for the worse. It stood as a stark reminder of how truly alone I was, how far from any form of help or rescue. The storm was closing in, and so was the house. And whatever was watching, whatever was making the house move and distort, it felt malevolent. It felt hungry. My gaze fell on the floor, near the threshold of the study. A faint, glistening trail, almost imperceptible, snaked from under the doorframe, across the polished wood, and disappeared beneath the heavy rug. It was a shimmering, sticky substance, the same unsettling crimson as the veins in Elara's plant. My stomach churned. It hadn't been there moments ago. It was moving. The house wasn't just closing in, it was bleeding. Sleep, when it finally came, wasn't a bomb. It was a descent into something far more vivid than memory. They pulsed, a dull throb that vibrated through my bones. And the smell. The next few days blurred into a peculiar haze. The dreams didn't stop. They grew more intricate, more insistent. I saw the conservatory, not as it was, but as a throbbing, fungal heart. The plants there grew with impossible speed, stretching their limbs, unfurling new, grotesque blossoms that wept viscous, opalescent fluids. In one dream, I was trapped amongst them, the broad leaves pressing against my skin, their crimson veins glowing with an internal fire. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, a phantom warmth still prickling my skin, the faint, sweet scent of decay still present. It wasn't just the nights. The edges of my vision started playing tricks on me. The condensation on a windowpane would seem to writhe, forming intricate, root-like patterns that vanished the moment I focused. I found myself pausing, staring, wondering if I was truly seeing it or if the isolation was finally getting to me. Was I just tired? Stressed? Or was Blackwood Manor, with its strange flora, seeping into my mind? One afternoon, while trying to catalog some of Elara's old gardening tools in a damp, forgotten corner of the conservatory, I found it. It wasn't a seed, not exactly. It was smooth, almost glassy, and about the size of a marble. What truly arrested me was its light. A soft, internal glow, a pale, emerald green that seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Bioluminescent. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The moment my skin brushed its cool, smooth surface, a jolt went through me. Not painful, but profound. It felt alive. A peculiar warmth spread from my fingertips, up my arm, and into my chest. And with that warmth came a sensation, a gentle, insistent pull. It wasn't a thought, not a voice, but a primal urge. Keep it. I picked it up, cradling the glowing orb in my palm. The light intensified slightly, almost as if in response to my touch. It felt heavy, yet delicate. I studied it, turning it over and over. There were no seams, no visible openings, just that continuous, soft glow. A spore? A seed of something utterly alien? I slipped it into my pocket, the faint green light a warm presence against my thigh. The compulsion was subtle at first, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. It wasn't telling me to do anything specific, just to hold it, to keep it close. I found myself unconsciously touching my pocket, reassuring myself it was still there. The dreams intensified, becoming less about fear and more about a strange, symbiotic connection. Well, since before I came here. Then the storm hit. A true Pacific Northwest tempest, whipping around Blackwood Manor like a banshee. Rain hammered the windows, wind howled down the chimneys, and the old house groaned and shuddered. The power flickered, then died, plunging everything into inky blackness, save for the faint, steady glow emanating from my pocket. That was when the compulsion took on a new urgency. Not a thought, not a voice, but a distinct, undeniable pull, like a phantom string tugging me towards a specific direction. My hand was clenched around the glowing spore in my pocket, its warmth a beacon. I climbed the narrow, winding stairs of the west wing, stairs I hadn't dared to explore before. They creaked under my weight, each step a protest. The wind shrieked louder here, finding purchase through unseen gaps in the ancient masonry. The air inside was a maelstrom of dust and damp. Rain lashed through shattered window panes high above, sluicing down the crumbling walls. The wind roared through the open arches, a physical presence that pushed against me. I looked up, the glow from the spore in my hand illuminating the swirling dust motes, the skeletal remains of an old wooden ladder leading to a higher platform, now largely collapsed. The compulsion pulsed, stronger than ever, urging me to climb, to reach the very top. My mind screamed at the danger, at the sheer folly of it, but my feet were already moving, searching for purchase on the unstable rungs. The storm raged, mirroring the chaos within me, and the glowing spore pulsed in my hand, a silent, insistent heartbeat demanding I ascend. I turned the glowing orb over and over in my palm, its soft light pulsing faintly. It felt impossibly light, like a bubble of solidified mist, yet carried a strange weight, a density that defied its appearance. A spore, I'd thought, a seed. But a seed of what? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I couldn't keep staring at it, not when a more immediate truth lay waiting. I carefully placed the orb on the dusty mantelpiece in Elara's study, its light a small beacon against the encroaching gloom of the room. It felt safer there, somehow, away from my direct touch, yet still within my sight. My determination was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I needed answers, and I knew where to find them. The journals. Elara's life, her descent, her secrets, all of it had to be scrawled across those brittle pages. It took a good hour of systematic searching, pulling aside stacks of botanical texts and crumbling specimen boxes, before my fingers brushed against the rough hide of a journal. Then another, and another. There were 5 in total, each thicker than the last, their covers embossed with a stylized, twisting bind pattern. As I gathered them, a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. The sky outside had been darkening for hours, and now the first fat drops of rain splattered against the window panes, followed by a distant crack of thunder. Reading these, I knew, wouldn't be a casual affair. It stood like a skeletal sentinel, a relic from an earlier age of the Blackwood property, long abandoned. It was a mad idea, but the isolation appealed to me. I grabbed a powerful lantern, the journals clutched tight under my arm, and stepped out into the burgeoning storm. The wind whipped at my clothes, tearing through the overgrown paths. The walk to the tower was a battle against the elements, the path turning to slick mud under my boots. Each flash of lightning illuminated the skeletal branches of ancient trees, making them seem to writhe in agony. Finally, I reached the tower. The heavy oak door, warped and swollen with age, groaned on rusted hinges as I forced it open. The first journal was thin, dated almost 30 years prior. Elara's handwriting was neat, precise, filled with meticulous observations of plant growth, soil composition, and light cycles. Her passion for botany was evident, almost infectious. It was the work of a dedicated, if eccentric, scientist. The second journal, however, marked a shift. The entries became less scientific, more personal. The patterns she'd written, they are more than just growth. They are language. She described feeling a vibration in the soil, a hum in the air when he was among her specimens. They speak, she'd scrawled, the letters beginning to lose their earlier precision, not with words, but with currents, with subtle shifts in their very being. They respond. They understand. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs, echoing the distant thunder. The third journal was where the true unraveling began. Elara's handwriting was erratic now, sprawling across the pages, sometimes almost illegible. She wrote of the manor itself as a living entity, its walls breathing, its timbers groaning not from age, but from a profound, internal life. It hungers, one entry proclaimed, underlined multiple times. The manor hungers, and I must feed it. Not water, not light. Something more, fundamental. Something with life. I paused, the journal trembling slightly in my hands. The storm outside intensified, the tower groaning and swaying in the fierce gusts. What did she mean, feed it? My mind raced, trying to conjure images of strange fertilizers, exotic minerals. But the tone, the increasing desperation in her words, suggested something far more disturbing. The root system extends, another entry read, deep beneath the estate. It draws strength, it demands sustenance. My specimens are merely extensions, feelers reaching for the light. The true intelligence resides below, within the very foundations of Blackwood. It wasn't just Elara. It wasn't just the plants. It was the entire manor, an organic, sentient entity, drawing sustenance from something unspeakable, communicating through its strange, insidious growths. The glowing orb on my mantelpiece flashed in my mind. A spore. A seed. Not of a plant, but of this thing. I flipped to the last few pages of the final journal. The entries were almost incoherent, a frantic jumble of capital letters and exclamation marks. It is awake. It knows. It has chosen. A new host. The cycle continues. Blackwood will thrive. My breath hitched. He had been tending a predator, a vast, insidious consciousness rooted deep beneath Blackwood Manor, and it was now fully awake. And I, Blake, had inherited not just the house, but its hunger. The storm outside felt less like weather and more like the manor itself, thrashing in anticipation. They mingled with the shriek of the wind, a banshee wail tearing at the stone, and the roar of the rain, battering the ancient walls like a relentless siege. Elara hadn't just been tending a garden. He had been tending a predator, a vast, insidious consciousness rooted deep beneath Blackwood Manor. The thought was a cold, sharp blade, twisting in my gut. I gripped the damp, salt-crusted stone of the window frame, peering out into the maelstrom. The sea churned, a frothing, angry beast, and the manor house, a distant, hunched silhouette, seemed to absorb the tempest's fury. It was no longer just a house, it was the visible tip of something monstrous. Elara's last entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, flashed in my mind. The hearth breathes. Its warmth is not of fire, but of life. The core demands sustenance. The hearth breathes. I dismissed it as poetic madness, another symptom of her isolation. But now, after seeing the creeping tendrils in the hidden passages, after reading her chilling confessions, the phrase took on a terrifying new weight. The core. He had mentioned it before, cryptically, in earlier journals, always linking it to the manor's deepest foundations, to the earth's secret pulse. I had to go back. The storm was a barrier, but the revelation was a more potent force, driving me forward. I pulled the heavy, rusted door open, the wind nearly ripping it from my grasp, and stepped out onto the crumbling path. The manor awaited, its true heart hidden, pulsing. The journey back was a struggle against the elements. Inside, the silence was almost deafening after the storm's fury, broken only by the drip of water from a cracked ceiling and the faint creak of settling timbers. I moved through the echoing halls, a flashlight beam dancing ahead of me, past portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move, past furniture draped in white sheets like silent, waiting specters. The hearth. Elara hadn't specified which one. There were dozens in the sprawling estate, some grand, some small and forgotten. But the phrase "the hearth breathes" suggested a place where a fire once burned, a focal point. I remembered a disused sitting room in the manor's oldest wing, a room Elara rarely entered, its fireplace choked with dust and cobwebs, its mantelpiece adorned with peculiar, petrified-looking branches. The fireplace, a cavernous maw of blackened stone, dominated one wall. I ran my gloved hand over the rough-hewn stones, feeling for any irregularity. Nothing. Like roots entwining, placed next to a reference to the heart's deep breath. I scanned the stones again, my flashlight beam crawling over every crack and crevice. There, half hidden beneath a thick layer of soot near the heart's base, was a faint engraving. It was the knot, barely visible, almost worn away by time. I pressed my fingers against it, pushing, pulling, feeling nothing. My fingers traced the inside edge of the mantle. And there, tucked away, almost imperceptible, was a small, smooth stone that felt out of place. I pressed it. With a low, grinding groan that seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the manor, a section of the back wall of the fireplace slid inward, revealing a gap, a black maw that swallowed the light. A gust of air, warm and strangely humid, carrying that cloying, fungal scent, washed over me. This was it. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the pull was too strong, the need to understand too urgent. I squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough stone scraping against my jacket. The passage behind was cramped, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on me. I shone my light ahead, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel descending steeply into the earth. The walls were not bare stone, they were interwoven with thick, fibrous tendrils, some pale white, others a sickly green, all matted together like ancient, diseased arteries. The passage twisted, spiraling deeper. The sounds of the storm outside faded completely, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a vast, slow heartbeat emanating from the depths. The air grew warmer, humid, clinging to my skin. My boots crunched on something soft and spongy underfoot, a carpet of fungal growth. Enormous, gnarled roots, thicker than ancient tree trunks, snaked across the floor, up the walls, and across the ceiling, forming an intricate, pulsating network. They were interwoven with vast, luminous fungal growths, some resembling colossal shelf mushrooms, others like clusters of iridescent, sickly sweet-smelling corals. A soft, green-yellow light emanated from these growths, casting an unearthly glow on the entire grotesque spectacle. The thrumming sound was louder here, a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my bones, a slow, organic pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own frantic heartbeat. It was the sound of something vast, something ancient, something alive. The air was heavy with the rich, sweet decay of earth and the overpowering, cloying scent of mushrooms, a smell that now felt utterly suffocating. I could see faint, rhythmic contractions in the larger roots, a slow, deliberate expansion and retraction, like giant veins pumping something unseen. This wasn't just a root system. This was the true heart of Blackwood Manor, a living, breathing entity that had consumed the estate, not just beneath it, but as it. This pulsing, glowing, fungal horror, was its lifeblood, its consciousness. I was standing in the belly of a beast, and its breath was the humid, spore-laden air I was struggling to inhale. I pulled my hand back from the pressed stone, my fingers tingling. It revealed not a void, but a narrow, spiraling stairwell descending into absolute darkness. The air that spilled out was cold and still, carrying that same sickly sweet perfume. My breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, to board up this newfound maw, but a different kind of urge, an insidious curiosity, pulled me forward. It felt like standing on the edge of a great height, the wind urging me to lean in, just a little. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam a meager spear against the black. It illuminated steps slick with condensation, and along the rough-hewn walls, the first tendrils of the manor's growths. Here, they were not merely creeping vines, but thick, pulpy ropes, glistening with an internal moisture, some of them pulsing with a faint, sluggish beat, like sluggish veins. They were a deeper, more vibrant shade of crimson and bruised purple than any I'd seen upstairs. It was a low frequency, more felt than heard, resonating in my chest. My mind, already frayed by days of unsettling discoveries, began to unravel at the edges. The pulsating growths seemed to twist, momentarily forming patterns that mirrored the lost face I carried in my memory. A trick of the light, I told myself, a symptom of exhaustion. But the image persisted, the contours of a beloved jawline, the curve of an eye socket, all woven into the fleshy tendrils, glistening with unnatural dew. Not actual voices, not yet, but a feeling of sound, a pressure behind my ears. It was a murmur of forgotten words, phrases from old conversations, twisted and distorted by the manor's humid breath. Stay, belong, here. It wasn't an echo of a voice, but an echo of a thought, somehow placed directly into my mind. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sensation didn't cease. It vibrated inside me. The stairwell eventually opened into a wider, cavernous space. Here, the growths were monumental, forming a grotesque forest of organic columns that reached towards an unseen ceiling. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, a bioluminescent glow that painted the chamber in shades of deep violet and sickly green. In the center of this grotto, amidst a root mass thicker than any tree trunk, I saw it, a rough-hewn stone plinth, and upon it, a single, bound journal. Its leather cover was cracked and swollen, pages stained with moisture and age. I approached, my movements clumsy, feeling a strange pull towards it, a sense of inevitability. My fingers, trembling, opened the journal. The script was Elara's, familiar from the letters I'd found upstairs, but here, it was frantic, sprawling, sometimes dissolving into mere scratches and symbols. The early entries spoke of fascination, of a unique botanical discovery. Later, of communion. And then, of surrender. One page, near the end, was marked by a pressed, dried leaf, a leaf from one of these very growths, I realized with a jolt. Below it, Elara's final, almost illegible entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, it calls. It grows. It remembers. It seeks a new steward. One who knows loss. One who will understand the peace of joining. And then, beneath that, a crudely drawn symbol that, to my horror, looked like a stylized, rooted human figure, its arms outstretched, its face indistinct but undeniably mine. The lost face from my memory was interwoven into the roots, smiling. A wave of vertigo swept over me. This wasn't just a garden, not just a house. My great-aunt hadn't just died, he had become part of it, and he had known I would follow. It promised an end to the ache, a cessation of all struggle, if I simply let go. I stumbled back, the journal falling with a soft slap onto the moist stone. I needed air, needed distance. I turned, scrambling blindly, following a narrow, upward-sloping tunnel I hadn't noticed before, driven by a primal need to escape the suffocating embrace of the root. The thrum of the root receded, replaced by a new sound, a distant roar that grew steadily louder. Wind. Rain. I pushed through a collapsing wooden door, splintered and rotting, and burst out into the teeth of a raging tempest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the churning, angry sea beyond. The storm outside mirrored the one raging within me. My clothes were soaked in an instant, my hair plastered to my face. The tower was a wreck, its circular room filled with debris and the skeletal remains of forgotten furniture. Rain poured through gaps in the roof and shattered panes, forming puddles on the buckling floorboards. The wind howled through every crack and crevice, a mournful, hungry cry. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to still the chaotic thoughts, but the visions intensified. It was smiling, beckoning, its features subtly shifting, morphing into something not quite human, something rooted, earthen. The root's insidious pull was stronger here, exposed to the raw power of the storm. My own reflection stared back at me from a rain-streaked pane, but it wasn't just my face. It was superimposed with faint, root-like patterns beneath the skin, my eyes seeming to glow with that same violet light I'd seen in the grotto. I was changing. The erosion was almost complete. My hand still tingled from the pressed stone, a phantom vibration. That was the moment I stopped simply reacting. That was the moment I decided to fight. The weight of it in my hand felt surprisingly grounding, a tangible defiance against the intangible dread that had been creeping into my every thought. Outside, the storm had broken. I could hear the wind howling like a banshee through the eaves as I moved, purpose-driven, towards the tower. The conservatory, usually a place of eerie stillness, now throbbed with a low, internal hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The air grew dense, humid, the sweet, earthy smell intensifying until it was almost suffocating. Reaching the iron-bound door to the guard tower was like pushing through a wall of resistance. The wood was swollen, the hinges protesting with a shriek that was swallowed by the storm's roar. Inside, the spiral staircase wound upwards into oppressive gloom. Tendrils, thicker than my arm, snaked from cracks in the masonry, their surfaces slick with moisture, pulsing faintly. They weren't just growing, they were alive, watching. As I ascended, the storm intensified. The wind shrieked through the tower's narrow windows, rattling the leaded panes. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the interior in stark, skeletal detail, revealing even more aggressive root systems twisting through the walls, some with strange, bulbous growths that seemed to mimic distorted faces. The air was now thick with the cloying, fungal scent, mixed with the metallic tang of ozone from the storm. I reached the top chamber, a circular room open to the elements on one side where a section of the wall had collapsed years ago. Rain lashed in, soaking the exposed stone and creating a slick sheen on the floor. In the center of the room, amidst a riot of writhing, intertwined roots that had burst through the flagstones, stood a single, monstrous plant. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, even in Elara's bizarre collection. From it sprouted massive, fleshy leaves, veined with an unsettling network of capillaries, and at its apex, a grotesque, pulsating bud, almost the size of my head, oozed a viscous, amber sap. This had to be it. The heart. The conduit. "You won't have me," I muttered, my voice hoarse, barely audible over the storm. I lifted it, the blade catching a flicker of lightning, and brought it down with all my strength. A shudder, not just through the plant, but through the entire tower, rippled violently. The sound that followed wasn't a groan this time, it was a piercing, high-pitched shriek that clawed at my eardrums, echoing the wind's fury. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. The plant reacted instantly. The massive leaves, previously still, lashed out like whips, cracking the air inches from my face. A thorny vine, as thick as a python, erupted from the floor beside me, coiling with terrifying speed. Aiming for my legs. I jumped back, machete raised defensively, my heart hammering against my ribs. The very stone of the tower seemed to convulse, showering me with dust and debris. Then, the true horror began. It was a direct assault, a violation of my inner sanctuary, making my head throb with agonizing pressure. I staggered, clutching my temples, trying to block out the psychic onslaught. This wasn't just a plant, it was a conscious, furious entity, and it was using our connection to break me. I forced myself to focus. This wasn't real. Not the despair. Only the plant, only the machete, only my will. With a desperate roar, I lunged again, ignoring the mental agony, aiming for the stalk once more. This time, the response was more violent, more personal. The pulsing bud at the plant's apex burst open with a wet, sickening thwack, spraying the amber sap across the room. It landed on my arm, burning like acid. I cried out, dropping the machete, scrambling to wipe the searing liquid from my skin. The flesh beneath was already blistering, the pain immediate and intense. Before I could recover, the floor beneath me gave way. Not a collapse, but a deliberate, organic reshaping. Roots, previously dormant, surged upwards, twisting and intertwining, ensnaring my legs in a vice-like grip. I fell hard onto the wet, crumbling stone, my head cracking against a loose slab. I struggled, pulling at the thick, woody tendrils, but they held fast, tightening with deliberate, crushing pressure. The amber sap continued to burn, eating into my skin. Above me, the grotesque plant pulsed with renewed vigor, its monstrous buds slowly closing, then swelling again. I couldn't stay. Not after that. A primal urge to find high ground, to see beyond the suffocating reach of Blackwood Manor, had driven me out into the sudden, torrential downpour. The sky had cracked open with a fury I hadn't seen since arriving in the Pacific Northwest. The wind howled, a banshee shriek tearing through the gnarled branches of the surrounding cedars. Lightning flashed, stark white, momentarily illuminating the tower's crumbling stone, revealing gaping holes where windows once stood. Thunder followed, a deep, concussive boom that vibrated through the sodden ground beneath my boots. The spiral staircase, barely more than a skeletal helix of rotted wood and precarious stone steps, beckoned upwards. Each step creaked under my weight, threatening to give way. Rainwater streamed through cracks in the ceiling, forming glistening rivulets down the walls. Higher and higher I climbed, the storm's ferocity intensifying with every turn. Wind tore through the open embrasures, whipping my hair, chilling me to the bone. Water pooled on the uneven floor of the small, circular chamber at the very top. There was nothing here, just exposed stone, a few splintered planks, and the relentless onslaught of the storm. I slumped against a wall, gasping, my clothes plastered to my skin. Then, a flicker of something in the gloom. Tucked into a narrow, vertical fissure in the stone wall, almost perfectly camouflaged by grime and moss, was a small, leather-bound volume. It was waterlogged, its pages swollen and warped, but undeniably a journal. Elara's. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. I found a relatively dry spot, shielded from the worst of the wind, and opened it. The ink had bled in places, but the script was still legible, Elara's familiar, elegant hand. Her language grew more poetic, more fervent, almost devotional. It has chosen. I understand now. My purpose was not merely to tend, but to prepare. To facilitate the transition. It seeks a host, yes, but not as a parasite, no. As a partner. A union. A grand symbiosis. The manor breathes, Blake, can you feel it? It yearns. It needs to expand, to spread its consciousness. And I have found my peace in its grand design. The ritual is simple, in its terrifying elegance. Surrender. Allow the tendrils to permeate, to merge. Offer your essence. Become one with the root, and in doing so, become everything. Become the manor. The garden. The world, or resist and be consumed. It is not a choice of life or death, but of acceptance or oblivion. There is no escape. Only a new form of belonging. Apotheosis. She hadn't been a victim, not entirely. He had been a willing participant, driven by a twisted reverence, a mad gardener cultivating not just plants, but a new form of existence. The low, grinding groan from the manor, the heavy, vital scent, it wasn't just a house, it was a living, sentient entity, reaching out, calling. The wind outside shrieked, a high-pitched wail that seemed to carry Elara's final, deranged conviction. Lightning ripped across the sky again, a blinding flash that momentarily seared the image of her frantic script onto my retinas. My mind reeled. Surrender. Allow the tendrils to permeate. Become one with the root. The choice. It wasn't about running anymore. It wasn't about finding a way out of the manor, or even off the estate. Elara's words implied a far more insidious, inescapable reality. The manor was not just a place, it was an intelligence, and it had chosen me. The only escape was through it, or by becoming it. My hands clenched, the waterlogged journal crumpling slightly. Oblivion or apotheosis? The words echoed, a terrifying mantra. I felt the manor's presence, even from this distance, a subtle thrumming beneath the earth, a deep, pervasive awareness. It was waiting for my decision. The storm wasn't just a storm, it was the world screaming, and I was caught right in its eye. The choice. It gnawed at me, a relentless worm in the core of my being, far more insidious than the physical tendrils now slithering through the manor's deeper passages. Elara's final, echoing whispers had stripped away the last pretense of this place being merely a house. It was a mind, an ancient, sprawling consciousness, and I was its latest obsession. The only escape, she'd implied, was through it, or by, what? Annihilation? Assimilation? I stumbled through a hallway that now resembled a vast, petrified trachea, its walls pulsing with a dull, greenish luminescence. Rain lashed against the few remaining window panes, a furious drumbeat against the manor's groaning timbers. It was the manor's eye, its nerve center, the point of most acute awareness. I could feel the entity's pull strongest there, a siren song promising answers, or perhaps, an end. The storm outside had reached a fever pitch. Wind howled like a banshee through unseen cracks, and thunder cracked directly overhead, vibrating through the very flagstones beneath my boots. Each flash of lightning illuminated a deeper horror, the twisting, serpentine growths that now coated every surface, thicker and more aggressive than before. They writhed, not with independent life, but with the collective, slow pulse of the manor itself. I had to push through them, their slick, cold surfaces brushing against my face and hands, leaving a residue that felt like slime and tasted faintly of iron. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged sound swallowed by the tempest. I reached the base of the tower. The entrance was a jagged maw, planks splintered, stone crumbled. Inside, a spiral staircase, once grand, now barely held together by a scaffold of thick, root-like tendrils. They had woven themselves into the structure, becoming both its decay and its desperate, grotesque support. The air here was even heavier, charged with static electricity and the cloying sweetness. As I ascended, the wind's roar became a guttural bellow, rattling the entire structure. Rain found its way through gaps in the roof and walls, cascading down the inside of the tower, making the stone steps treacherous and slick. My palms were raw from gripping the rough, damp tendrils that served as a banister. With every step, the feeling of being watched intensified, not by a single pair of eyes, but by 1,000 unseen pores, a vast, patient intelligence. It was waiting for me. The panoramic view was a maelstrom of churning clouds, lashing rain, and skeletal trees bent double against the wind. But my eyes were drawn inward, to the center of the platform. Here, the organic growths converged, forming a pulsating, bioluminescent mass that resembled a colossal, malformed heart. It was rooted directly into the stone, sending out thick, black veins that spider-webbed across the floor and up the walls. The sickly sweet odor was overwhelming now, almost narcotic. And within its translucent depths, I saw them, faint, swirling currents of light, like trapped consciousnesses. Elara. And not just her. Others, perhaps, who had come before her. This wasn't just a garden, it was a mausoleum of minds, a harvesting ground. The root, as Elara had called it, wasn't merely a plant. It was a parasitic consciousness, ancient and slow, that absorbed the living essence of those who tended it, integrating their minds, their memories, their very identities into its own vast, ever-expanding network. The manor was its body, and its inhabitants were its food. This was the reveal, the horrifying truth. Elara hadn't been controlling it, he had been part of it. A vessel, a caretaker, her consciousness slowly dissolving into the collective. And now, it wanted me. It had chosen me, not as a master, but as its next meal, its next node in an eternally growing network of stolen lives. My name, Blake, echoed amongst them, stretched and distorted. It wasn't a question, it was an invitation. An offer of eternal connection, of becoming one with everything, shedding the burden of individuality. My mind reeled, assaulted by images, flashes of Elara's memories, glimpses of the manor through her eyes, centuries of growth, of waiting. I saw the faces of forgotten caretakers, their expressions serene, absorbed. The choice was stark, surrender, and become another swirling light in that grotesque heart. My consciousness dissolved into the root, or fight, and risk, what? The storm raged, mirroring the tempest within me. I couldn't become one of them. I couldn't let my identity, my grief, my very essence be devoured. The escape through it Elara had mentioned, it wasn't about physical escape from the manor. It was about escaping the pull, severing the connection without being consumed. It was a main artery, a conduit. If the manor was its body, this was a vital vein. A surge of desperate clarity cut through the fear. I wouldn't let it take me.
Not like this. I wouldn't be another voice in its endless choir.
My gaze swept the rain-slicked platform, searching, and landed on a heavy, rusted iron bar, once part of a railing, now lying half-buried in debris. The central mass pulsed faster, emitting a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through my teeth. It was trying to lull me, to draw me in. But I was Blake. I was me star. With a guttural cry torn from my raw throat, I lunged forward, not at the central core, but at the thick, anchoring tendril. I brought the iron bar down with all my strength, a primal scream of defiance lost to the wind and thunder. The tendril thrashed, a severed limb, and the entire tower shuddered violently. A piercing shriek, not of sound, but of pure, psychic agony, ripped through my mind. The green luminescence flickered, dimmed, then flared with furious intensity. The manor roared, a sound deeper than any thunder, a sound of ancient, wounded rage. I struck again and again, hacking at the thick, writhing mass, feeling a sickening resistance, a sensation of cutting into living flesh. The fluid coated my hands, my face, burning slightly, tingling. Finally, with a last, desperate swing, the tendril tore free from the wall, whipping wildly, then collapsing, limp and oozing. The central mass dimmed significantly, its pulsations slowing, becoming erratic. The tower groaned, swaying ominously in the storm. I stood there, panting, the iron bar heavy in my trembling hands, my body screaming in protest, soaked in rain, slime, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I had done it. I had severed a connection. But as I looked down at my hands, still coated in the alien fluid, I knew. It wasn't over. I had escaped its immediate grasp, physically. But the lingering burn on my skin, the faint, sweet scent that seemed to cling to my very pores, the profound, unsettling quiet that followed the psychic shriek, it told a different story. I was out, yes. But something had changed within me. A seed, perhaps. A resonance. A memory of the root. I was irrevocably altered, carrying a piece of its horror, a fragment of its insidious presence. The decrepit guard tower stood, battered but unbroken, a silent sentinel against the raging storm. The manor remained, its ancient evil unbroken, waiting. And I, Blake, walked away, not free, but forever haunted, a carrier of the enduring horror, the knowledge of what truly lurked beneath Blackwood Manor, now a part of my own blood and bone.